So first, we're going to get going here with the second part of today's panel. First, I'd like to introduce our very own Terry Travis. Terry is the co-founder and director of EV Hybrid Noir, the nation's largest network of diverse electric vehicle drivers and enthusiasts, which works to advance EVs and other e-mobility solutions across the United States and ensure that those solutions are inclusive and equitable. Drawing from his engineering background, Terry has worked diligently to engage diverse and underserved communities in areas of mobility and sustainable energy, as well as highlighting the financial and public health benefits of transitioning to next generation zero emissions vehicle. Welcome, Terry. Our next panelist, Maurice Henderson. Maurice serves as a senior advisor to the Secretary of the Department of Transportation. He has served in leadership roles both domestically and internationally in the public and private sectors, as well as on a number of political and advocacy campaigns. Most recently, Maurice was the Senior Director of U.S. Government Partnerships at the transportation technology startup Bird Rides, Inc. Previously, Mr. Henderson served as a member of the Oregon Transportation Commission, North American Bike Share Association, Green Roads Foundation, and Fourth Mobility. And finally, we're joined by Secretary Jennifer Granholm of the U.S. Department of Energy. Secretary Granholm was sworn in as the 16th Secretary of Energy in February of this year, becoming the second woman to lead the department. Secretary Granholm is leading the department in helping America achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050 by advancing cutting-edge clean energy technologies, creating millions of good-paying union clean energy jobs, and building on an equitable clean energy future. Prior to her nomination as Secretary of Energy, Secretary Granholm was the first woman elected governor of Michigan, serving 2 terms from 2003 to 2011. Today, 1/3 of all North American electric vehicle battery production takes place in Michigan. And the state is one of the top 5 states for clean energy patents, and over 126,000 Michiganders were employed in the clean energy sector. I want to extend a warm welcome to Terry, Maurice, and the Secretary, and we'll hand things off to Terry to get the conversation rolling. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very pleased to be here with both of you all today. Understanding that you both have worked very diligently in the mobility space, I think that provides a really good opportunity to have a very robust conversation. Secretary Granholm, understanding that you drive an EV as your daily driver, very excited about that. And Maurice, understanding that you've worked in the mobility space with the city of Portland and working with Bird and now the Department of Transportation. Let's take just really want to take a deep dive and dive right in. Recently returning from Scotland over in Glasgow for COP26 with attending meetings looking at the global decarbonization of transportation electrification with our partners over at Fourth as well, attending those meetings as well. Really wanted to take a dive into the question, Maurice, Secretary Granholm, how are you seeing, or how do you feel like the U.S. is positioned right now in the global clean transportation revolution that's happening?
Who do you want to go?
Whoever wants to take that.
I'm going to defer to the Secretary first, obviously, as she was just at COP.
I was, and thank you, Maurice, and thank you, Terry, as well. This is really a great honor to be able to be here. So let me just put it into context a little bit, because when it comes to passenger vehicles, let me tell you, things are so much different compared to when I was governor of Michigan, which of course is the automotive capital of the world. But back then, about 10 years ago, foreign automakers were eating our lunch. The American auto industry was nosediving into the Great Recession. Everybody was going bankrupt. And it wasn't until the Obama-Biden administration made key investments in what I call Car 2.0, the electric vehicle, and the battery that powers it. It wasn't until then that we started to see things turn around. And today, America's auto industry is racing toward this all-electric future. The big 3, as many of you know, are aligned with President Biden's ambitious goal for getting half of all new vehicles sold in 2030 to be zero emission. In fact, President Biden was just in Detroit yesterday promoting what the bipartisan infrastructure law is going to mean for new jobs in the American auto industry. And then both Ford and GM pledged last week to phase out gas and diesel powered vehicles by 2040 entirely. So there's a lot of excitement too around newer entrants like Tesla and Rivian. And so people around the world are increasingly opting for EVs. I think we're going to see a lot of them driving American-made cars and trucks, which is exciting. And of course, transportation in general is obviously more than just passenger vehicles. Of course, there's trucking, there's aviation, there's marine shipping, and in every category, the U.S. is pushing toward more sustainable, low and no emissions technologies. We're doing a lot of this at the Department of Energy. We invest in technologies like we have a super truck initiative, which in the past has really just helped trucks be more efficient as internal combustion engines. And now we are really focused on electrification and hydrogen fuel cells to make sure that these trucks are zero emission. And I've been driving around in these big rigs. Gina McCarthy, the president's senior advisor on climate, and Secretary Gina Raimondo, who is the head of the Department of Commerce, went for a ride in a couple of these American-made truck cabs, one running on batteries, the other on fuel cells. So bottom line, a lot going on, including in the Department of Agriculture, where we're focused on sustainable aviation fuels, which obviously goes beyond passenger vehicles and freight vehicles. So I think the U.S. is leading in this global clean transportation revolution. And I think if we can prove that our economy can run on clean transportation, all sorts of countries are going to line up to follow suit. It's a very exciting moment.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So the next question that I have, Monday we saw the historic signing of the infrastructure bill. And with that, that's a historic investment in transportation and infrastructure. I'm going to throw this one to Maurice. One of the things that, is critical to think about is that what does equitable implementation of this bipartisan infrastructure bill look like from a Department of Transportation perspective? I know that you all are collaborating with cross-agency meetings with EPA and DOE and the White House, but how are you all thinking about how does this rollout and investment make sense from an equitable implementation vantage point?
No, really appreciate the question and following up on the Secretary's comments. Just the diversification of the industries that we're looking at in terms of electrification is part of that. But I think what's most important is on day one, the president signed several pieces of what we call executive orders in for the administration to be following. And one of those was around Justice 40, which meant that 40% of all of the benefits around climate and clean energy would be realized in communities that have traditionally been underserved. He also signed an executive order that stipulated that we take a look at how federal government programming and procurement can be an effective tool for ensuring that communities, that businesses led by people of color and women, people who are differently abled, have an opportunity to participate fully or more fully than they have in the past in these processes. And so what you've seen in this administration and Secretary Granholm and her team at DOE and all of the partners across government, and certainly the work that we're doing here at DOT under the leadership of Secretary Buttigieg, have been laser focused on ensuring that racial equity for all and climate are leading indicators of the work that we're doing. We're going to be announcing very soon RAISE grants, the Rebuild American Infrastructure through Sustainability and Equity. That is something that's really exciting. That's $1 billion that's going out the door. That's projects in communities that, all across the country that have been on hold in many cases, looking for the federal partnership that we're actually able to bring now, and really excited to do that work with communities. A lot of the listening that we're going to be doing to make sure that we're understanding the needs and the values of communities out there as they align with our federal priorities in terms of the investments of the president and vice president and secretaries have been articulating over the last several months.
Great. That all of that actually makes sense. Really exciting to hear. It leads to another question. So one of the things, we've had teams like Tarek and others on our team have been working on this policy toolkit. One of the things that we know is that policy alone is just not going to be the magic bullet to solve all of those issues, and to ensure that we see just transition as we think about this disruption that's happening around mobility. How are your teams, both at DOT and DOE, thinking about ensuring that diversity, equity, and inclusion stays at the center of this conversation? Just understanding that As Representative Clark mentioned earlier, there's a huge opportunity. Those who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. And those who are in these underrepresented communities across levels of social economics and education stand to benefit the most from this transition to a cleaner and greener transportation future. Like, how are you all thinking about ensuring that diversity, equity, and inclusion stay at the center of this conversation?
Yep, maybe I can jump in and really sort of building on what Maurice was just talking about. I mean, environmental justice and equity and inclusion are this administration's North Star. There is no denying that the fossil fuel powered economy has left a disproportionate number of Black and Latino and Indigenous communities carrying this undue burden from carbon pollution. And you know, I think of this in so many ways, but one important way is looking at the economic opportunity that should be directed toward communities that have been left behind. And so, for example, the global market for clean technology. So all of these countries, right, have these goals of getting to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So they're all going to need the products and the services that help them to get there. And the question is, where are those products going to be built? If it's a $23 trillion global market by 2030. That is just massive. So one of the administration's priorities is to make sure that disadvantaged communities are at the front of the line for the benefits that we draw from that market. And that's what the Justice 40 initiative is steering. 40% of the benefits of these bills, the Build Back Better agenda, must be directed to communities that should be at the front of the line. And so, you know, this means that we have to be clear about and transparent about where the money is going, that we're documenting it clearly, and that it's not just embedded in like one-off offices in our departments, but that it's infused as part of the culture of our departments. And so we've got a whole team that's focused on this, especially since the bipartisan infrastructure law is going to put a whole lot more responsibilities onto the Department of Energy. Some of those will include communities that will need to raise their hand and say, I want to be considered for a demonstration project in some of these new technologies. And if we're smart about this, those communities need to be prepared on the ground to be able to raise their hand and know how to access. So we've stood up a whole series of entities, including Communities Leap, to help communities, particularly BIPOC communities, be prepared to be able to have a competitive hand raise, if you will, for those opportunities. And I know this is happening at the Department of Transportation too. I know it's happening all across the government, is that we're all being very intentional about how the opportunities and the funding flows are going to first address communities that have been disproportionately negatively affected. So, you know, that day one executive order that Maurice referenced, that has been infused in every aspect of this administration. So proud to be part of an administration that is really looking at things in the way it should to correct historical racism, structural racism, and really impact the communities that should get the first benefits of it.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to the Secretary's comments is, as the representative mentioned, the SMART Grants program is a $500 million program over 5 years. About 30% of that money goes to rural communities, for example. There's a set aside to ensure that communities that have seen persistent poverty over a 20 or 30 year period also have capacity building grants. So that technical assistance that the Secretary was just alluding to is something that's critically important for the administration and definitely a focus of the president's in this bill. Terry, I think you're muted.
Thank you.
No
Leads
problem.
me to another question. What is the role of advocacy groups, OEMs, utilities, and other professionals in the mobility space? How do you think that those folks and those organizations can support the Build Back Better agenda? Because it's an opportunity for the United States to, and as a country, for us to really advance our infrastructure, access to mobility, all of those different things. So, like, how do you see the role of these organizations to be able to help advance that package?
Madam Secretary, you want to take that one first, or you want me to?
Sure, I'm happy to do it either way, but I'll jump in and you fill in the gaps on your
Yes,
your
ma'am.
end. That'd be great. All right. So we've obviously got to get the rest of the agenda over the finish line, and as you noted, or as Tariq noted, that there is a vote happening. I'm looking at my screen off to the left here. Right now, it's deliberating, so it's very exciting. But of course, that second step, the Build Back Better Act, will not be complete because it's got to go to the Senate. The Senate has to do its work with it. So hopefully it happens before Christmas. But we know at least today there will be another significant step forward. That is going to be key because, first of all, the president is confident, very confident that we're going to get both, the second bill over the finish line as well. And once we do that, there are a few things that all sorts of organizations can do to help make this Build Back Better agenda successful. First of all, help make sure that the investments go to good use. We've all got relationships with state and local policymakers who are going to have access to clean energy. And for example, energy efficiency block grants. Everybody's got relationships with the private sector, which is going to be the biggest mover on a lot of these clean energy deployment projects. And some of those who are watching are part of the private sector. So we want people to jump in and start financing these projects with tax credits and grants that are going to be available right away. And the other thing, I think, is to make sure that people are aware. American people are aware of the benefits that they can get from these investments. These are so big, these bills, that we all have to be telling people what the benefits are so that they're not just happening under the radar, but people are really seeing and feeling it. There's incentives for all sorts of things. As the Congresswoman said, like electric vehicles, there's incentives for solar projects that are going to suddenly make affordable options for vehicles and combined with solar on homes so that they can be able to use batteries as a backup power source in case of an extreme weather event. But, people need to know they exist if we want them to make use of them. So we're going to be trumpeting this stuff at every opportunity we get. There's no question that the more voices that are out there talking about it, the more people who will hear about it. And I do want to just take a moment because there's been a ton of groups and, non-governmental organizations and advocacy groups and the private sector who have helped to get us to where we are right now. This historic bipartisan infrastructure law, this historic Build Back Better agenda, once we get it complete. Thank you for your work in making sure that Congress knows how important it is that we address climate change as though our hair is on fire.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in echoing the Secretary's comments, we would not be here without the voices of the community out there. Congressional members have definitely heard from their constituencies. We have heard from those constituencies. The priorities that are outlined in this law are things that have been driven by the voices of communities, but there's obviously more work to do. And so we're excited. We feel like this is an opportunity for those who've already seen what self-empowerment can do. We're trying to help provide the tools and services and resources that are necessary to get some of these big projects off the ground, as the Secretary was mentioning. I think that the work of the philanthropic organizations and the private sector to de-risk some of these projects by making some of those investments, by helping with the capacity building that we were referring to earlier, is going to be a critically important step. A lot of these voices are the trusted voices in communities. These are the folks that people turn to in their times of need. And so we're going to be looking to them for ways to engage. And as the Secretary mentioned, making sure that people understand the benefits that are out there and available to them. And so that work is something that we'll be doing hand in hand with all of those partners, whether they be private sector, academic, public sector, et cetera.
Great. That brings to another point that comes to mind for me. It is, we think about, as was mentioned earlier, policy has been great to enact these laws that ensure that we're going to have a cleaner and greener mobility future. But how do we begin from a DOE, DOT perspective? How do we begin to normalize EVs? Secretary Granholm, you mentioned something. I watched the video with you and Advisor McCarthy in the Bolt, and just talking about the fact that you, as someone that drives an EV daily, may have had range anxiety at some points in times. Think about those underrepresented communities who, across levels of social economics and education, haven't really been exposed to this. We've done quite a bit of data analysis and research on this. And one of the biggest impediments when it comes to transportation electrification is folks just haven't experienced the vehicles, they're not aware. So from a DOE, DOT perspective, how are you all thinking about, addressing that?
Maurice, you want to go first since I've
Sure.
first the last times?
I appreciate the opportunity, Madam Secretary. I also am an EV driver, so I understand the situation in terms of range anxiety. When we were buying ours, my wife certainly had questions about the efficacy of buying one of those vehicles. But that being said, I think the important thing is the kind of partnerships, Terry, that your organization is developing throughout the country, the kinds of showcase opportunities that I know you've done, the partnership you have with groups like Fourth Mobility that are out there presenting the different mobility choices that are available. As you mentioned in the outset, I worked in the micromobility space over the last couple of years, and prior to that was in local government and transit. And so we are constantly iterating at the state and local and regional levels around the new technologies that are available to folks. And one of the things, going back to this notion of equity, is making sure that those investments and those innovations are equitably shared or equitably available or equitably visible to people so they understand what the opportunities are for their communities. And certainly the work that the secretary did when she was governor of Michigan, driving the auto industry towards looking at electrification of their fleets, looking at the electrification of the offerings that they were putting out into the public space, and then also the renewable energy investments that the state of Michigan was making. I mean, I think that's why you have leaders like her at the helm of the Department of Energy. You have Secretary Buttigieg here at DOT, who made really incredible investments in his small community of South Bend around smart cities technologies, making sure that folks in his town understood what the benefits were for electrified transportation choice. And so we're really excited about the potential of partnering with folks like EV Noir and others, and making sure that people get to see, touch, feel, and ride in or ride on these mobility choices that are out there that are electrified, that are clean energy choices that are, going to be incredibly important for creating living wage jobs, good union jobs. So I think there are a lot of opportunities going forward for those kinds of showcases.
And can I just jump in on it, because it's such a great question to build on what Maurice was saying. The law, the bipartisan infrastructure law, of course, as the Congresswoman said, the building out of EV infrastructure is so critical, because the private sector is not putting EV infrastructure in places where there are not a lot of electric vehicles. So it's not even a chicken and egg thing. We need to get the infrastructure in, and then people will see, there are places to be able to charge these if I don't have a garage. Many people don't even know if they have a garage. You can just plug it into a grounded plug and let it sit overnight, and you'll be charged up. But a lot of people, a lot of communities that are poor don't have garages. And so making sure that we are thinking really intentionally about putting charging stations in apartment buildings, in multifamily dwellings, and of course along roadways where people can see them and have access to them. That includes along highways, and I would say that includes as well in rural areas which don't have access to EV charging infrastructure. So EV charging infrastructure is critical to normalize what you're seeing, and then of course making these EVs affordable for real people. And so that's why the tax credits at the point of the dealer, where you can bring an EV to the price of a gas-powered vehicle because you're getting it off the top because of these refundable tax credits right at the top. That is a huge step to be able to encourage people to think about electric vehicles. And I will say, we hate the gas prices the way they are, but for the long term, over the long term, we want to make sure that people know that if you drive an EV, you will never have to worry about that. You will never have to go to a gas station. You will never have to worry about the volatility and relying upon our geopolitical adversaries who supply the majority of oil in the world to determine what the price of filling up your car will be. So we're really excited, certainly long term, about having a whole infrastructure that normalizes, as you say, the use of EVs. And as an EV owner, I actually drove the first Chevy Volt, the Volt, but which preceded the Bolt, off the assembly line at the same factory that the president was at yesterday. That was my first car. It was a hybrid, right? It was a gas powered half and electric vehicle half. But that was my first, my second, and my third EV. I leased them all. Is a Bolt, first Bolt, and then the second Bolt. I'm on my third Bolt. So I love these cars so much, and they go so long now on distance-wise on a charge that it shouldn't be a barrier for anybody to be able to get an electric vehicle, and it's a lot cheaper to maintain. So I want to be the poster child as an advocate for EVs.
Well, thank you. Dr. Tariq has joined us. I want to thank you, Secretary Granholm and Mr. Henderson, for joining us and sharing and imparting your experience and expertise in this space as well. Thank you very much. And Tariq, I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. We want to extend a warm welcome and a warm thank you to both the Secretary and Maurice. And thank you, Terry, for moderating the discussion. We're going to give everybody back a few moments here. Looks like we ran out of time. So we will play the Chair Randolph's remarks here at the very end of the conference, hopefully. But these next panels will begin, I think, in about 5 minutes within their respective session rooms. To get into the session, please navigate to the Sessions tab on the left side of your screen and click on the link, or the administrators I believe have dropped it here in the chat as well. So again, everybody, thank you so much for joining us this morning or this afternoon. We look forward to your participation in the rest of the conference.